mean, you probably. I would start that like. Just give people a chance to. Actually, if you want to make posts just on like your stories or whatever, just like to go live, just or something. Yeah. Is this okay? So you'll see that too.
Yeah.
I can make that check.
That's all good. So this is what
This is instant.
if I do anything.
Yeah, that's instant. So cool.
Remember how I opened last time? Thanks for hanging out. Something like that. I don't recall.
Yeah. Well, we have the tech.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's two.
Oh,
You know what? Oh,
it's one of them you.
the counts. So it's like it's just so you can still see that current numbers.
Oh, cool, yeah.
Current two there.
Yeah.
It's not super big, but it's usually
Cool. So we on? Alright. Thanks for showing up tonight. It's going to be kind of a fun one. Based on some of the feedback I got from last episode, some people wanted to know more about technique of palette knifing, and one request was also for sexy naked men. So I happen to have one right here, ready to go. But it's not a finished piece. It's been a work in progress for a bit that I haven't quite finished up. But I'm going to be adding some gold leaf to this to kind of accent what the rain would look like on this particular piece. So this episode is called Palette Knives and Gold Leaf. So one thing about gold leaf is you need an adhesive in place for it, and so I have the Metal Leaf Speedball product with the very beautiful Mona Lisa on there. It's high grade for what it is. And what I'm gonna use for this is a very tiny palette knife to place where I want this to be. The tricky part about the glue is it needs to be tacky for about 45 minutes before it actually will adhere to the gold leaf itself, because it's quite delicate. So I'm gonna put the glue on where I want the gold leaf to live eventually, and then set that aside, and then we'll tackle a few other projects. So I'm putting on pretty liberally. I just kind of want to put it on in chunks and dribbles. One thing about using the palette knife, which is kind of good, is it'll allow me to get fine and sharp lines. So I can actually have like the rain appear to be dripping right off of it. So I would think that based on the shape of this umbrella, a lot of rain would kind of be at the top and be piddling down along these parts that would be the rods. And again, as you can see here, I made a bit of a dribble and a mess, but the great thing is I'm dealing with water, so I like to call these happy mistakes, so it'll be just fine. I'm not too worried about it. So also to this particular person might be getting rained on themselves. Maybe they just get done, you know, going for a skinny dip, and they just, you know, are done getting rained on and just kind of want to dry off a little bit. They didn't bring a towel, so, you know, do what you gotta do. I kind of want to focus on more of these long lines to kind of get some more of the adhesive there. This will really help cut it in. The great thing about working or painting with rain is there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It can kind of go in any direction, and it just depends what the wind's doing. So I want to make sure that the ground looks wet too, because that's where it's all going to accumulate. I want to make sure there's a pretty healthy amount as well, because it is frustrating if you're putting the gold leaf on and you have a real spot that you'd like it to be and the adhesive isn't there, but you're already started putting it on the other areas. The great thing about the palette knife is it kind of gives you a lot of randomness as well, which is pretty fun to play with. So this particular painting is a new style I've been playing with. I like a lot is wood paneling, but actually staining the wood with different tones and oils and things like that to kind of bring out the richness of the grains, and having that be part of the artwork as well, just to kind of give it another depth, similar to what would be used on a canvas, but also can really kind of play with a few other techniques and kind of work that into the painting as well. So for this one, for example, there's a lot of highlights and lowlights, the dark and whites, but I've also used the grain of the wood for the midtones as well to kind of incorporate that. So it's been fun to play with this technique and this style. It'll be fun to see how this all plays out. It'll be pretty cool. I'm gonna mainly put the focus of the rain over top of the character, but I will have some in and around just to make sure that the elements are everywhere and not just hitting the umbrella and just hitting the character. Based on kind of the story I just told, I don't have a name for him yet. Does anyone have a name that they think this guy would be? Or do you know him? Maybe someone you know. Alright, I'm going to set this aside for a little bit just to get that tackiness going, as I mentioned earlier, and also get some of this glue off my hand. So as I mentioned before, I need to give this about 45 minutes or so to get to the right tackiness to make sure the gold leaf will adhere as best. Pretty sticky stuff. I'm actually never had it on my hands before. I'm a lot stickier than I anticipated. Just gonna run to the sink for a quick second and wash my hands. Alright, thanks for your patience. So I think I'm gonna hop on Instagram Live here now for a little bit. As well, and see if a few followers there show up. Ask some questions, see what's going on. So, as I mentioned, been working on this one for a little bit. Gonna add some gold leaf here in a few minutes, half an hour or so, kind of see how the tackiness comes, and then we'll apply that, and then it'll really pop and come to life. So also from the last episode, someone had asked if I would demonstrate a bit more about palette knifing. I didn't do a whole lot last week, and palette knifing is actually my tool of choice. I find I can get a lot done in a quick amount of time, but it also is quite freeing and fun to play with. So my plan tonight for this one is I'm gonna take this character, similar idea. I've stained this wood to be called Sun-Worn, I believe it's called, the stain on it. And then I've taken a bronze Conte and charcoal and kind of laid out the mark points to where I kind of think this pose makes sense for me. You can see I've kind of changed the foot a few times here and just kind of gesturally put in the landmarks again of the neck and the shoulders and the hips. I've put a bit more detail in the face for this one. That'll help me down the road, just because it is kind of a small area in all reality. So using the palette knife for that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, just because it does work with a lot of paint more effectively. So where this one's a bit different than last week, I was working like with washed out acrylic. I'm going to be using full heavy body acrylic as well. So in this term, I'm not going to work light to dark. I'm going to work dark to light. So I'll start with more shadows and dark colors. So essentially, I'm going to use some blacks and grays to kind of figure out where I want this outfit to go and how it's going to play out. Then I can go in later and add colors and highlights and things like that too. So I'm just going to use some Mars Black. Payne's Gray. Yeah. You want me to? Thank you. Cool. All right. So some of the Payne Gray as well, and then a bit of the Ivory White. And to the question I was asked as well too about the palette knifing, that person had asked, like, how do I know when to use a heavy body paint versus a non-heavy body paint? For me, it's more about the tone. I think I mentioned this before. The heavy bodies seem to have richer pigments to them, where the lighter ones are a bit more of a wash. So it just depends on what your need is. Obviously, the thicker you can put on any paint, the more color it will have to it. And also as well, you can seal those in, and that'll help kind of keep the color quite vibrant as well. So there's many different types of palette knives. This one's my personal favorite. I'm able to do a lot with it. As you may have seen earlier, I had a really thin one. This one has a bit of an angle, but kind of a mid-size compared to this one. And then some other ones too just have different shapes and angles that you can kind of play with depending on the technique and what you're going after. I also have some really big ones, but just depends on kind of the size of the piece I'm working on and if it's a background. So in this case, I'm going to be doing more detailed work, so I wouldn't use this too much, if at all. But if I was going to fill in this background and try to get a really strong, rich texture, I would play around with this one. So this is a character from when I was way back in art school. That I kind of just created a little universe of characters, which I think we all may have, and gave them all personalities and names and backstories and things like that. So this one's kind of, in my mind, was the leader of the thought of bad guys, I guess. She's had her own agenda and had a lot of manipulation skills, and was able to convince other characters within this universe I had designed and created that she was able to get what she wanted, and at the right cost. But as that story kind of evolved and grew, you kind of realized perhaps not everyone's as one-dimensional as you might have thought, as life tends to be. But yeah, I kind of went pretty deep with this. I actually used like Myers-Briggs personality matrix to come up with what these characters might be like, and it was really fun to kind of dig into that and learn about people's personalities and tendencies and the psychology kind of behind characters and what they do and how they do. And then you kind of look into things like Marvel and DC and those kind of comic books and those stories, and it's pretty interesting that a lot of those hold true across many stories, which I guess is probably why we like them. So I always kind of envisioned this character in like a lot of black and kind of revealing outfits, but that kind of evolved over time. I just think not sure how revealing and how dark it's going to be anymore. I'm just kind of playing with the shadows and the highlights here right now and marking those in. So is anyone got a name they think this character should be based on a bit of the background story I've been telling? Yeah. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to write them out. Thanks. Thank you. It's coming along. I find there's about 7 stages to a painting, and takes a while to get through all of them. That's for sure. I think this character would wear kind of taller boots just based on the fact that they'd want to appear kind of regal and kind of somewhat of importance, and would really want people to know that as soon as they walked into a room. Hey Bridget, how's it going? Hey John, how are you? So again, for the palette knifing, again, it can hammer a lot of this paint out really quick, and I really like how it gives a lot of texture right up front. It really brings things to life, at least for me. Helps having kind of the parameters of what was there prior as guidelines with the drawing. But I don't ever feel I have to stay with inside the lines doing it this way either, which is kind of great. Because even if things get a bit messy, they don't really make sense. If you're looking for a lot of detail, your eye tends to fill that gap for you with either thinking that's part of the costume or part of the accessories or the jewelry or things like that. So it's kind of fun to really more play with at this stage the shadows and the lowlights and the highlights, sorry. I'm kind of painting this one, it kind of feels like Charlize Theron for some reason. So for me right now, I'm kind of figuring out where I want my light source to be, so as I'm playing around with this, I'm feeling it's more coming from this side. So I'm going to start adding that in with these angles here. I still want to leave enough of the natural wood tone there to actually be a bit of a mid-ground for the mid-tones that I'm going to be keeping throughout, so I want to play a bit more with that. So again, I really love how you get this speckle and playfulness with a palette knife, just spreading the stuff around. It really allows you to get a lot of texture and playfulness for sure. So for this back leg, even though it's going to be the same boot style, same color, I'm going to go a bit darker because it's actually in shadow and it won't feel too bizarre. Just going to want to play on that color scheme of like what's in light and what isn't. So I tend to use a lot of paper towel when I'm palette knifing, just based on the fact I find the knife itself can get pretty gunked up, so I just want to make sure I have a clean edge as much as possible. Especially if I want to go in and do some fine lines. That's one thing that's great about the knife for me, is the fact that I can go in, even with this smaller edge, and just kind of start hammering in some angles. Kind of gives it a bit more of a detail and an edge to it. It's also, what's nice I find with it is just it allows you to get a bit more passionate and involved into the piece. Not that you get angry at it, but you can it's quite malleable, so you can kind of play with it a bit and still play around with it and make it work for a bit. Hey Carrie, thanks. Yeah, I'm actually doing this piece for you. Yeah, it tends to actually end up looking more 3D because I do layers and layers and layers and kind of get those textures, and then kind of as you build those layers, I find what's actually starting to dry, you're putting new paint over top and pulls on it and actually gives you more like richness of what that texture is going to be. So it's kind of fun to see how that plays out, and once you kind of get used to doing it a lot, you can plan it and time it accordingly to go back to those areas and keep layering, so you can kind of bring those darks built up over time, and then your highlights will actually kind of pull on some of those instead of just being the plain white in this case that I'm doing. Are you painting tonight as well? Hey, buds. So I'm not really sure what I wanted to do with this character, what their hair should be. It's always been a kind of a question: wear it up, wear it down, or be bald, or whatever the case may be. I've never really been felt one way or the other about it. You're welcome. I think I kind of just want to do almost like there's a headpiece here or something. I guess I did mention she's kind of got the attitude that she wants to be regal or seen as such, so I think this kind of makes sense in some ways. And for this where it's kind of nondescript, it's fun to just kind of play around with whatever those shapes could be. There's no right or wrong at all, which is always ideal. So again, I just kind of want to use more of the edges to kind of pull some of this whimsiness in and playfulness of this headpiece. I think it's kind of looking pretty fun. It's also too, it's always good to like make sure your characters are anchored instead of just floating on screen. So here I'll probably keep it a bit darker, just in order to give it that weight at the base. Kind of rule of art is if you want something to look solidified and solid on the page or the board in this case, just make sure that it has like a solid foundation. It just allows your eye to feel that there's weight to it, there's gravity, it's somewhat in a sense of reality. Otherwise it can feel not real, and it kind of doesn't sit well with some people's brains because they're like, this wouldn't work or this doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not gonna give it the time of day. So you kind of gotta think about how people like to perceive things, but I think that's what's great about surrealism is the fact that you can kind of play with that a bit and play with the mind. So I'm gonna set this one aside for a bit. I want it to dry, and I also want to live with it before I go any further and kind of take in what I've done so far and plan out the next phases and see what colors kind of come from it. But that's just a kind of show and tell of how I kind of get to what I would call step 2, step 3 of a painting before I would finish it off. So thanks for the inspiration, Carrie. I really appreciated the insight because it gave me a plan of what to do tonight. Yeah. Cool. So I'm gonna come back to the guy with no name who's out in the rain, and gonna put on the gold leaf and apply that to the stickiness and then brush that out. But I'm just gonna put on some gloves because the gold leaf is kind of sensitive about the oils in our skin. so it can actually tarnish them if you put it on with your fingers. So ideally I like to keep a pretty clean leafing when I do it. You flopped the other night? Oh, keep at it. Do you have a variety of palette knives to carry, or just one? Or I would suggest kind of playing around with different sizes, because I find everyone that I know who likes to work with them kind of has a different favorite than I do, at least. So it kind of just depends on what you're able to accomplish with what you are trying to do. So if you're not familiar with gold leaf, it's pretty darn delicate stuff. So this is it here. And it's like lighter than a feather. I actually see it kind of floating when I move it. So I'm gonna start sticking this on to where I had the glue. And I'm gonna move it around so it starts catching where I put it. So I'm just kind of tapping it in just to see where it's going to stick based on where I placed the adhesive earlier on. And if you think this looks like fun, it is. Because you get to be pretty messy and it's not a big deal. Hey buds, don't eat that. Just kind of attempting to remember where I placed it all and making sure I can kind of get that adhesive taken on. Hey Sam, that was no good. Who put that mic there? I want to make sure, as I mentioned before too, similar to the last piece, making sure there's lots on the ground, because that's where the rain will end up for sure. So for this particular one, I was kind of hoping for a bit more of the raindrops to show up. I do know what the issue is. I didn't have enough glue or adhesive actually on the palette knife when I was putting it on, so it kind of lost a bit, but you can kind of see here I got some of the effect I wanted. What I'm gonna do next is actually take like a big brush and just kind of knock off the extra and go from there. You can kind of see it pulls off anything that's not really adhering to the piece. But don't need that. So Stan is actually covered now in gold dust because he's been trying to eat it. I'm gonna get that off. Good. So what I'll do with the next instance, once this is completely dried, I do another layer of the adhesive and do a few more sheets of the gold leaf. Not sure if you can even really see it that well from where you are. I'll bring it closer to the camera. You can see it quite well here. I'll kind of shimmy it around so you can kind of get some of the light. Yeah, that's how you gold leaf. So last episode I had a giveaway, or I'm going to be doing the giveaway, I should say, of this piece that I worked on. And it's a charcoal drawing of a really amazing doll of Pasha Pasha, New York. It's a Instagram account I follow, and she creates these super intricate dolls that are quite beautiful. Pardon me. And I got to thinking, when I was doing the drawing last episode, I didn't leave enough white space for the amount of jewelry that's on this actual character in the doll. I'm not sure how big they are. I'd love to see them in person, but I assume they're not super huge, but they're insanely detailed. So I wanted to introduce another product I like to use for highlights. It's essentially a gold wax, and you can use this to kind of put on different highlights as well, and I think it'll play really nicely with the black and white, similar to the pose of the guy with the umbrella. I wonder if you can actually see, you can see actually the gold better from the distance now back there, kind of catching the light a bit. So again, I'm going to use a palette knife here, a really tiny one, and kind of play around a bit and kind of work this into what this character's outfit would be. You can get this wax in a variety of different metallics. I'm using gold for this one because that's what was actually used for the character I was inspired by. However, you can get like silver, bronze, champagne, lots of different techniques and ways you could kind of build those together and to give you a different effect too than just having the one. So this character had like a lot of bangles and bracelets and necklaces and these really big glasses, kind of like Edna Mode from what was it? The Incredibles. Yeah. So we did do a draw of the winner for this piece, so I'll be getting in contact with you and sending it off once we get in contact and find out where you want it sent to. Oh, a hat. I don't have a hat. You have a hat? All right. Let's do it now. You need like a big draw. Kelsey Goucher. Cool. Well, we have your number. We will reach out, Kelsey, and I'll find out where you want this shipped to, and I'll make sure it's packed with care and sent on its way. I'm going to keep adding a bit more of this gold to it. I'm liking how it's going. Hopefully you do too. And you can hang it wherever you like, and I'd love it to know where it ends up living. Always curious to know where things end up on a wall or wherever they do end up. So again, Kelsey, thank you very much for participating, and thanks for hanging out with me. So this character had like a lot of like little chains and things too, so I'm gonna go in after with a bit of ink and kind of detail those out once this wax is dried and adhered to the paper. So I'll give you a close-up of the effect of the gold wax. So as I mentioned, I'll go in a little after and take some black ink and add a few more details over top to give it the depth. But I really like how the dimension of this is kind of added with the metallic wax. So also, I had worked on this piece pretty quick last week using a brush, and to the point too that Carrie reached out about palette knifing. I wanted to go in and add a bit more detail to this particular one, and just kind of show a different way to do it. Because sometimes I will use a brush to almost do all the landmarks, and then go in with the palette knives and kind of give that extra texture, the depth, the 3D kind of look and feel, but also kind of give that range of variety of colors too. Even though I'm working in black and whites on this one, it's really kind of interesting how much you can get out of mixing those with the gray tones. So I'm going to use a different knife than I used last time. I'm going to use the this one. I don't know if it has a name. I'm sure it does, but I don't know what it is. But I kind of want to play more with this guy's hair. Actually, I'm going to grab his reference image as well. See a bit more highlights going on than what I gave him. He's got some pretty wild dreadlocks here, which is pretty fun to paint, especially with palette knife, because they're so random anyway. It's just fun to like play with those and see how they come to life. So his hair is pretty dark on this side, by way of the photo, but I still want to work in a bit of the texture of that, and as you can see here, I'm kind of playing in a bit of the whites just to give it that shape too. But I can go in with a little more, and then kind of almost give it some wiggle and some texture, kind of like resonate a bit more with how the dreadlocks might actually be. Let's get this really cool curl that he's got going on there. And I'm intended in the beginning to keep the purple as kind of like the mid-tone, but as this guy's hair is pretty wild and kind of the main focal point too, there's not a lot of point for me at this stage to keep much of that in there. I'll keep it more for his face and kind of his expression as well. One thing you'll find too when you're using palette knives is you will go through way more paint than if you are using brushes. But I don't mind because I like the end result too much. There's a few more highlights in here with his hair, and then I'll start giving the face a bit more detail. So you can see like using the point kind of gives it a bit more playfulness depending on which end you use. So I can get a pretty thick line there and a pretty thin line over here for this. So again, it's like a really great tool for getting a lot of paint down in a variance of design and style. So I had this guy's goatee a bit too pronounced before, so I'm gonna give him a bit more shape of the lips, bit of his upper lip there, kind of a few more highlights in here that kind of got lost in the last go around. Right now, still kind of playing with a bit of the mid-tones, kind of get those shapes in. As I mentioned too, I always kind of like to keep my knife as clean as possible. Just for instances like this where I got a glob around his eye, it's actually couldn't have been more ideal placement that it fell, to be honest, because he does have a pretty sizable shadow there. So again, another one of those happy mistakes that I look for every time I start painting. Actually, now that I look, I'm starting to look like Jason Momoa a bit. as I mentioned the other night too, I kind of like doing one eye with a lot of detail, but keeping the other one very kind of obscure and not detailed, and allow the viewer to kind of fill that in for themselves, how they'd like that to be. He does have this one dreadlock that casts a shadow. So I'll do a little touch up on the eyes, and I think that's about it for this guy. Cool. Kind of wish I had a before and after picture, but there you go. All right, well, thanks everyone for hanging out. It's been fun. We worked on a lot of, as the title goes, palette knifing and gold leaf. I didn't, I'm gonna have to do another round of the gold leaf, as I mentioned. Didn't get quite enough of the adhesive on there as I'd like, but it actually is topping quite well, which gives me a good indication that it will once I have a bit more on there. So thanks for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we learned something. Carrie, thanks for all the ideas. So if Carrie, you have more ideas, or anyone else they'd like to learn about or know about, ask any questions, feel free to drop a note either on Instagram or through YouTube here itself. So thanks, and have a great evening. Take care.